His Promised Land, Chapter 13. The series of incidents which I have related and am about to relate extended over a period of years, during which time I assisted 440 fugitives on their way to Canada. For years I kept an accurate list of the names, dates, and original homes of the fugitives. When the fugitive slave law agitation was at its highest, and active prosecutions began its enforcement, everyone engaged in the work destroyed all existing evidence of his connection with it. My little memorandum book I dropped quietly in the cupola of my own iron foundry, so no one knew its existence, especially its damaging contents. But the work went on just the same, in fact, more aggressively than ever, which speaks well for the conscience and courage of the Ripley group. As a result of my running off the Strofe slaves, the authorities of Mason County, Kentucky, offered a reward for me dead or alive. I had heard of this offer, but placed little credence in the statement until I read it myself, nailed securely to the bark of a tree. I had been up to Charleston Bottom, arranging to aid a group of slaves who were ready to start for Canada. It was dark night. I had no fear for the road patrols, whose activities generally ceased long before midnight, so that as I went along the high road I saw a proclamation of some sort from time to time, never dreaming it related to me. They became so numerous my curiosity was aroused. Striking a match, I read in large letters, "Reward, $1,000 for John Parker, dead or alive." Not conducive to quiet one's nerves, nor guarantee one's safety, particularly when I happened to be where anyone so minded could have had me if they could catch or kill me. I did not go off whistling after I had read that sinister offer for my head, because I knew how deadly in earnest the men were who authorized billeting me from every fence corner as being worth $1,000 to any rascal who saw me. However, the following week I was back at the Charleston Bottom, ready for the most humorous adventure of my career. It was a queer affair from the first, and the further it advanced, the more laughable it became, until its climax, which, in a way, was a tragedy to one of the slaves. I had made this appointment before I had read my own death warrant, but I decided to go on with it, since the runaways would be waiting for me to return. To my astonishment, I found the slave quarters all dark, except one cabin, which was very well lighted. This unexpected situation caused me to stop, and then advance cautiously to the lighted cabin to see what this illumination was about. It was like a scene from a comic opera I peered upon through a small window in the side of the cabin. The room was filled with men and women and children, each one with a bundle. If they had left anything in the home or the house, it was because the utensil was too heavy to move, or else it had been nailed down. Tin pans, tin pails, and anything else that could make a racket was securely tied on outside the bundles. One woman had a footstool, another one her own favorite hoe. The other things in sight I had no desire to see or catalog. What I did do was to wait and see if the row had aroused the suspicions of the master. When I felt assured on this point, I entered the cabin and blew out the lights myself. I made them put down their bundles. I then told the crowd that I could only take a few of them. The rest must bide their time until later. Then the row started as each one grabbed its bundle, fairly arousing the dead with their noise and clamor. I couldn't get out of the door, so I went out through the window, across the fields like a scared rabbit to my boat, which I pushed off, thankful that I had not been captured and carted off to jail. While I am on the humorous side of my otherwise tragic adventure, I must tell this little incident, which, too, had its scary side to one of its victims. I had been sent word that on a certain night, on a certain plantation, I would find a group of slaves ready to take the road, but there was no leader to show the way. Strange as it may seem, I had no hesitation in going to the rescue, in spite of the fact it might prove to be an ambush to capture me for the reward. But I was there on time, and I found a woman weighing 300 pounds who looked in bulk as large as an elephant. She was not of the original number, but having heard of the plan, had voluntarily joined the crowd to their utter astonishment and fear. I told her she couldn't walk to the boat, and if she did get there, she would fill the boat herself. Nothing I could do or say affected her in the least. She was going along on the party, whether she could walk or not. Knowing that she would yell her head off unless we took her, I happened to see a buggy in the yard. That settled the matter for the moment, so we lifted our fat lady into the buggy. I got into the shafts and started off with my crowd, determined in my own mind that the woman was not going along. I had to get rid of her so far away from the master's house her yelling could not be heard. But how? A mud puddle settled the whole problem in a jiffy, for arriving in the midst of a soft spot, being a large distance from the house, I simply dropped the shafts of the buggy and ran away. The last I heard of my charge, she was yelling and screaming. How she got back to the house I never knew, but I landed my party safely and got them away, so that they were never heard or seen again. A more serious aspect of this reward offered for me turned up in Cincinnati. As I suspected, the cupidity of some of the low whites was aroused by the offer of a fortune to them for me. I soon discovered that I was being watched and my every movement spied upon. They watched me, they watched my home, and kept tab on all those who called upon me. At a conference, it was decided that until the matter of the reward quieted down, it would be safer for me to stay at home. Word was sent out that no fugitives were to be brought to my home. Furthermore, I was not to pilot anyone along the road to freedom, so for a time I enjoyed seclusion and rest. This espionage kept up until I tired of it. Once, just to test the mettle of my pursuers, I slipped out the back way, took a long aimless walk around town, and had the enjoyment of giving my spying friends a hope, which finally ended back home, having given my watchful friends quite a bit of exercise. But matters came to a head in an unexpected manner. It seems that Tom Collins had 2 parties of fugitives come to him the same night. The first party he took away as usual, the second party coming while he was away. Someone in town who did not know I was confined to my house sent the second crowd to me. When they came to my door, my wife answered the call out of the upstairs window. While I could not see them, I felt they were genuine and badly in need of friendly assistance. I was soon ready for the road and prepared for anyone who attempted to interfere with me. The watchman was on my tail. I was determined to get rid of him one way or another, without kicking up too much of a disturbance. Taking my time going up an alleyway that ran along the foundry, I hit upon my plan. Turning onto 2nd Street, I hung back in a shadow and waited for my man. He almost stumbled over me in his haste. Grabbing him by the arm, I pushed him out into the moonlight so he could clearly see the knife which I held at his breast. I knew he was no coward, so I took no chances with him. Pressing my knife close to his chest, I told him I knew his Kentucky friends were paying to watch me, that I had enough of him and them, and unless he went on about his business, I would kill them at every other time I found him following me. It was his life or mine, this he knew, and I was in deadly earnest and meant exactly what I said. This was the end of the night watch. The last serious effort to capture me for the reward led to an encounter and a real tragedy, which caused me much mental distress and accusations for years after by the friends of the victim. I had been to Cincinnati on business and was returning on one of the large upriver packets with no thoughts of trouble from any source. The steamer had hardly left the Cincinnati wharf when I ran into 4 Kentuckians whom I had rather not met. 3 of them were slave owners, whose slaves I had run away. The 4th man was a man by the name of Anderson, who lived in Dover, a Kentucky town a few miles below Ripley. While Anderson was not an avowed friend, I had done a good turn for him a short time previously, so I felt he was not my enemy. The other 3 Kentuckians were. I was walking along the deck when I ran into this party of 4 men. One of them put his hand in his pocket, as if to draw a pistol. I was just as quick, cocking my pistol in my pocket, determined to fire through my coat if attacked. Anderson, who was really a quiet and peace-loving man, quieted down his belligerent friend, who turned away from me with a scowl. They had all been drinking and were in an ugly mood. There was trouble brewing, and no one knew it better than I did. On board of the steamer was a colored freeman from Ripley. He was a friend of mine, but not a fighter, so I knew I could not depend upon him in case of an attack. But he could stand watch, and he kept me informed, and he could keep me informed. Finding him on the lower deck, I induced him to come to my cabin. I then went to the captain, who was friendly to me, due entirely to the large amount of freight I gave his boat from my foundry. I told the captain of my encounter, and told him I expected more trouble, which I wished to avoid. My plan was to retire to my cabin and to keep to it until the boat reached Ripley. For fear that both my friend and myself might fall asleep, I begged the captain to send someone to knock on the door to be sure we got off at Ripley. I implored the captain not to fail me, as the next stop after Ripley was Maysville, Kentucky, and if I were on board, someone would be killed trying to drag me off the boat for the reward. Hearing the captain's assurance that I would be given ample notice and time to get off at our destination, I went back to my stateroom. Having fallen asleep for some unaccountable reason, I awoke myself and looked out the window to see the mouth of Eagle Creek, which was 5 miles past Ripley and halfway to Maysville. I had no time for recriminations against the captain. I was in serious trouble. I afterwards learned that the captain did send a porter to wake me, but the 4 men had prevented him from doing so, thus effectively trapping me until they were ready to act on our arrival at Maysville. Thinking I might get away, I opened my door on deck quietly, only to see 2 of my enemies on watch. As my position was becoming more and more serious every minute, I opened the door leading into the cabin, only to find the other 2 men on guard on that side. What to do was a problem, because I knew now they had me in their hands, and I was worth $1,000 to them dead. I knew that was just what I might expect to occur. Thinking they might let my friend, who was with me, through to see the captain, I explained to him the situation and begged him to go see the captain and have him land us on the Ohio shore, but the man was so badly scared he refused to do so. Then we were hopelessly trapped. My companion made a suggestion which we finally decided to act upon, even if it led to killing anyone who got in our way. He said there was a yawl suspended over the stern of the boat, which could be lowered quickly in case of an emergency. Though it required 3 men to handle the lowering of the yawl, he thought the 2 of us could do so. Once safely in the water, we could row back to Ripley, and the steamer could pick up her boat on her next trip back to Cincinnati. It was such a feasible plan, I fell in with it at once. Having a plan and only a short time to execute it, there was no time to lose. Knowing my companion and knowing myself, I took his pistol, determined to act as bodyguard while he handled the lowering of the yawl. There was only one way to get by the man guarding our door, and that was to start shooting as soon as I got out the door. Placing my companion behind me, I opened the door and stepped out on the deck with a pistol in each hand, only to find my guard gone. Beckoning my companion, I started on the run for the stern of the boat, determined to shoot down any one of my would-be captors. Much to my surprise, there was not a soul in sight. While I stood guard, my comrades swung over the water into the yawl. Everything seemed to be working to our advantage. My friend had loosened the front guy rope and was working at the stern guy rope of the yawl. I was reaching for the rope to swing over into the yawl when 2 of my enemies came thundering down the deck with pistols in hand. I opened the encounter by firing point blank at one, who fell onto the deck, then exchanged shots with the other until he dodged into a cabin. Backing away to where the loose end of the yawl rope lay, I swung myself into the bow in the still suspended yawl, where my companion was struggling with the stern line holding the yawl. The steamer was under full way. I could see the eddying water bubbling up from beneath her hull at least 20 feet below me. Dropping the pistol I had discharged into the bottom of the boat and putting the other one in my pocket, I began working desperately at the line and held the bow of the yawl. My comrade was equally as busy, but both of us, being ignorant in the method of launching the yawl, made little progress. There was a hitch somewhere, but I knew nothing about the rigging, so there we hung in midair, the yawl swaying back and forth, threatening at any time to throw both of us into the boiling water below us. We tugged, strained, and pulled at the ropes in a last frantic effort for our release. What happened I never knew, for the next thing I knew the yawl was flying through the air, and the next instant struck the water with a jerk that threw me overboard. Flailing out frantically, I was fortunate enough to seize the side of the yawl, which was still attached to the steamer, dragging behind it as if half-submerged condition. When I had regained my senses, I looked around for my companion, but he was gone, and I never saw him again. My position now was worse than when I was on the deck of the steamer, for in my haste I had neglected unfastening the rope that held the yawl to the steamer. The result was that the yawl, to which I was holding, was bouncing up and down, and at the same time was being dragged through the water at a great speed. The rope tied to the steamer pulled the bow of the boat high out of the water, but sunk the side to which I was clinging, so that half the time my head was under water. The long rope gave the yawl so much play, it swung into the waves from the paddle wheels, threatening to tear me loose and set me afloat down the river. My situation seemed hopeless, for if let loose, my clothes would pull me down. If I stayed where I was a helpless target for my enemies, who I knew would soon find me. All I thought of at the time was how long would it be before I would be shot. I have no recollection of having fear of drowning, so I clung desperately to the side of the leaping yawl. My head bobbed under the water one moment when all seemed over. The next moment, looking blearily through the water dripping over my eyes, I saw the form of a man on the deck high over my head. Then I knew my end had come. But I held on just the same, determined to fight, trusting in my good luck to the end of the game of chase I was then so hopelessly playing. I had expected the shooting to commence at once and pull myself together to prepare for the shock. My face being up longer this time, I saw the man was Anderson, and he had no pistol. He was the only man that might show some compassion on me. If ever a man threw his trembling soul into an appeal, I did as I pleaded with Anderson. He made no response to my appeal and stood heartlessly watching me as I helplessly rose and sank with a half-submerged yawl. I yelled to him, "For God's sake, cut the rope," but my begging fell upon deaf ears as he soon turned away and left me to my fate. My heart grew faint and my grip on the yawl weakened as I felt my position was hopeless and I was only prolonging the agony. It was my obsession against drowning that called me to my task. I was too much of a fatalist to ever fear death. When my time came, I would go, but I was afraid of drowning. It was a last minute of holding on that prevented me from slipping away. In the twilight, I saw a man. Then the yawl seemed to sink away from the steamer. Anderson had cut the rope. Once I ceased to be hauled relentlessly by the steamer, the yawl settled to an even keel. It was easy then for me to scramble over the side of the little boat and sink down helplessly into the water with which it was partially filled. I floated downstream, oblivious to my surroundings, until I was aroused by the feeling that the yawl had gone ashore. Arousing myself from my exhausted stupor, I stirred myself to activity when I discovered I was hard aground in Kentucky, the last place I wanted to be. As the oars had been lost, I pulled off a slat. Using it as a paddle, I slowly and painfully made my way to the Ohio shore in safety. My comrade's body was found several days later, with a bruise on the side of his head, evidently made by striking the yawl as he was thrown overboard. He was known to be an excellent swimmer. My enemies made the most of this fact, accusing me of killing him, and made every effort to have me indicted for murder. It merely indicates how desperate were the men to trump up any charge in order to get me permanently out of the way.